I'm going to show you quickly a few images that are just to kind of tease your thinking, but then Kyle has other ones. The other members of this panel are Elizabeth Ferry, and we were privileged to hear from her yesterday, and today she'll, I hope, or perhaps, be talking about some of her thinking about inherent preciousness of gold, or where preciousness comes from. Lori Watt, who's the co-owner of Mayer and Watt, and we heard Simon yesterday, particularly strong comments about Sri Lankan sapphires, and we're delighted to have Lori. And then Benjamin Zucker, who is an author, an authority on precious gemstones, and a gem merchant. And there is one thing, now that we're looking at this luscious red stone, that I want to say to you, which is that Benjamin is the author of 3 novels, in each of which, one of the protagonists is a stone of the color that by which the book is titled. I hope that was grammatical. Therefore, green has an emerald, blue has a sapphire, and white, which Kyle has right there.
Benjamin has green.
Yep, has a diamond. And I'm going to go back to the red stone because Benjamin has been working on red for a long time, and I hear there's now a manuscript. So I am super psyched. And having said that, I just mentioned our moderator, who is a dynamic and dear, Kyle Roderick, who she's a journalist. She founded something called Bijou Review, which is on Instagram. She is the author of Bejeweled.
Photo editor also.
Oh, okay, which is in her hand. So she's the author of Bejeweled and contributes to many publications, and we're absolutely delighted to have her. So with that, what is precious?
Well, thank you all for coming and hanging on to the bitter end. We're sort of had 2 days of debating what is precious, and we've got here a cast of key leaders, I would say, in different realms that relate to precious materials, precious philosophies, precious products. And I want to kick it off by talking about how preciousness is something that really depends on, I guess, consensus, right? It's something that people have to agree on in order to define it, but of course nobody can really agree on it. And in our world, we see how those who have sometimes more marketing power can define what is precious and communicate that to a large audience, whereas some other people who may produce very gorgeous, precious things can't really reach a bigger audience. So I wanted to kick off by saying how we have Meyer and Watt, we have Lori and Simon here, who deal in very exquisite, rare, special gemstones, and one of the ways that they've been contributing to the public body of knowledge regarding preciousness is they have this very fascinating Meyer and Watt app, which identifies gemstones as Gemopedia, so that people have a fund of knowledge that they can, this is all evidence-based information. In other words, it's not influencers telling you, oh, this is such an exquisite stone. It's, thank you, Simon. So this is one way that I think if we can share these kinds of resources with other people, it's, we tell other people in the community, tell retailers, tell designers, hey, get this app, use it. It's going to help everyone in this room, including people at auction houses, including people who are maybe goldsmiths or designers, students, etc. So, Lori, I wanted to ask you, if you could kick off talking about how you and your husband and son, you go around the United States.
We were speaking earlier about,
Yeah.
Our goal is that we work with people who make jewelry. That's our intention, that's what we want to do for a living. People often say, oh, do you sell to the public, or do you do this? We work with goldsmiths. That's what we do, and that's our focus. It's old school, and it's how we do our business. But many times when we're out there trying to make a living, even more, okay, sorry. When we're out there trying to make a living, a lot of the jewelers don't know the stones that we're selling. So we run into this whole issue of A, needing to train their staff, B, needing to train a lot of the jewelers, especially in the more unusual stones, and C, trying to educate their clients. So we do a lot of in-house work with jewelers. We will go into a jewelry store, we'll get to know people. Again, we're very selective. They have to have a good rating, they have to have a good reputation. We make a big effort to make clear that they are doing business in the moral, correct manner that we approve of. But we'll go in, we'll sit down with a bag of stones, and we'll show them, what do you think, Simon, a couple hundred stones, and they'll go and say, oh, is that a ruby? And we'll say, yeah, no, that's a rhodochrosite, right? I happen to know where the rough came from. I know who cut the stone. I can tell you it's an American stone, and it's soft and delicate, so you don't want to put it on a ring. You want to make sure to wear it on your body. And this is the conversations that we have. Well, our son came in, and it's a very precious stone. It's my husband. A lot of the reasons of the invention of the app was our son, who's more digital and more techno than either Simon or I are, because we're a little more rough and ready and older, definitely wanted to introduce the app so that he could use it to actually even just introduce himself to a jeweler by saying, oh, here, let me show you this. And as soon as the jeweler or their staff see that we have an app, a whole different attitude opens up.
Yeah, I would have to say that it's the right tool at the right time for the right sensibility that is prevalent now. And
100%.
a lot of, while I was preparing for this conference, I spoke to a lot of different gemstone dealers who deal in both colored stones and diamonds. And several of them told me, you know, in the last couple of years, my colored gemstone inventory versus the diamond inventory has like doubled. Color gemstones are very popular now. They're perceived as more precious now than they were by a broader, would you call it, a demographic or a customer base or jewelry-loving, you know, clientele. That's just the way it is, according to my unscientific survey of around 8 people. But they were.
I know a few more.
But you know, dealers. But they're dealers in the United States, dealers in the United Kingdom, dealers in Australia. I spoke to people in Hong Kong as well. So that's what they're telling me. And also the statistics from AGTA show that there's a lot of, I don't have the exact figure. I took a note. Oh yeah, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the BEA, colored gemstone imports into the United States increased by 136% between 2020 to 2024. So that's kind of interesting in terms of showing how maybe the perception of preciousness is become, for colored gemstones are being maybe more coveted, maybe more valued. I mean, I couldn't say exactly what it means, but I mean, it does seem significant, right? 136%.
Huge. Well, and if I can, I don't want to dominate, but
yeah,
when I first started in the business, when I was about 20, 21, so it was a few hundred years ago, there were a few dinosaurs still roaming around, but not tons. I would go out and carry a bag. First off, I was one of 3 or 4 women that I had met in the industry who actually went out door to door with merchandise. I would carry anywhere from wholesale cost, $500,000 to $1 million, right? And I'd walk into a jewelry store and I would say, I deal in colored stones. And 9 times out of 10, the jeweler would say, oh, you mean semi-precious?
Oh, God.
So when we were asked to do this presentation, I wanted to illustrate immediately that my stones are just as precious.
Okay, thanks. So that's a good way to get into the mind of Elizabeth, who is a professor, anthropologist at Brandeis University in Waltham, Mass. She has contributed to this very fascinating book, which I just ordered on Amazon, what's the title again?
Anthropology of
Thank you.
Precious Minerals.
The Anthropology of Precious Minerals, but it includes discussion of, take it away, Elizabeth.
Okay. All right, well, I had three quick things I wanted to say. I'll keep them quick and then keep going. Sorry. So just one thing to build on what you were saying about consensus and the kind of social constitution of preciousness, or the way that people come together. So I'm an anthropologist. I spoke yesterday more about the work that I'm doing with people who work with gold, both artisanal miners and also finance people and banking. But the previous book that I did was actually a study of high-end mineral specimens. And that's a really interesting case because it is, you know, in some ways similar kinds of materials to the kinds of things that you all work with in the gemstone industry, but the ways in which it's presented is very different, right? And it really has emerged. One thing I thought was so fascinating about that was that, you know, the transition over the last, 50, 60 years from mineral specimens to being mostly of scientific interest, or, this shows that there's like a certain amount of copper in this region or something, to becoming these precious objects and objects of kind of fine, so-called natural art. So that's just an example of what you're describing. I wanted to just make two quick points. I'm not in the business at all, so I'm in the business of sort of thinking around concepts and how people are sort of creating an idea of preciousness. So I'll just intervene in that way, and then you will have all your much more amazing experience. First, just the notion of precious, as I'm sure you all know, it's from the same root as the word for price. And it's also related to another word that's kind of in there of priceless, right? So, preciousness is this interesting thing because on the one hand it can mean simply expensive, but that doesn't really cover it, right? It also covers these much more, aspects of value that are much more beyond the economic, in some ways even, counterposed to the economic, right? The kinds of the ways in which the previous panel, for instance, was talking about soul and authenticity and strength and, things that, yes, those things circulate in the market, those beautiful pieces of jewelry, but they kind of exceed that also, right? They can't totally be contained by the number that, somebody pays for it. I thought the example of like something that your grandchildren will fight over was a great way to think about that. So in thinking about preciousness for the volume that Kyle so kindly mentioned, and in the work around mineral specimens, I came up with a sort of mini proposition for how to think about preciousness with respect to stones and minerals in particular. And since you've asked, I have the chance to kind of present it to people who have so much experience. So I'm going to tell you what I think, and you can tell me that you disagree. So I propose that preciousness in the context of things like gold or diamonds or rhodochrosite, which of course the Sweet Home Mine was a big part of my book about mineral specimens, is a combination of the natural world, something that comes from the natural world that is sort of beyond humans, right? You can't make these things. You can shape them. You can put them into designs, but there's something in there that's sort of beyond the human, and the beauty that's beyond the human. Then there's also the social, right? Preciousness also is a social phenomenon, and you think about, the kind of the name of these heritage houses, or what does it mean when Beyonce wears a particular piece, or
Status.
Status, right? Questions around
situation.
Exactly, status and consumption and all of those things. I think that also contributes to what makes us think of something as precious, right? And then the third one, and I'm very curious what people think about this part of it, is something that in writing about it I called the transcendent, right? And I went through a different, ideas of what I would call that. Would I call that spiritual or supernatural or sacred? And I decided on transcendent because I wanted something that covered a lot of different realms, that could include things like the, sense of, when we talked in the earlier panel about the ways in which Ashanti relate to gold, right? Or in the work that I do with artisanal miners in Marmato in Colombia, where gold is a living force that chooses the miner rather than the miner finding the gold. Also, aspects of the sacred, also the transcendence of a family, right? When we think about, when we're going to hand something down, I'm wearing my grandmother's gold ring with a sherry topaz and diamonds, small diamonds, right? This is something that sort of is meaningful to me because it kind of reaches something that is beyond myself, right? So transcendent in that sense. So I'll end there, just,
Right.
here's one way of thinking about what makes something precious. Thanks.
Well, I wanted then to turn this over to Benjamin, who has written many authoritative books, including it was up on the screen, the
book, which was my collection of diamond rings.
Yeah. You might want to talk about preciousness in the context of rings, since you're such an expert in that. And rings also, on Google searches, they are the most Google searched item. It's actually diamond engagement rings are the most. There's something like 40,000 searches a day in this country for Google searches, for diamond rings.
I love your building blocks, discussing what's precious. To me, what was precious and what is precious would be you're shown something, whether it's a Venetian ring, and you say, oh my God, I must buy this. And you don't know, it might be a Jewish wedding ring from the Venice from the 16th century, and or it might be like in 1980s I was shown the Taj Mahal emerald, which I named, but when I saw it, I just took my breath away. So you sometimes see something such as an emerald, which has such a complicated carving pattern, and it's maybe big like this, and you think, how could someone carve these flowers? And you think, this must be the greatest thing that ever went through a Mughal court. Or in my case, when I saw the wedding ring, I said, oh my God, I must buy this. And at that time I had $20,000 in the bank. It was after I graduated from Harvard Law School. I went to the auction house. The first ring, that was the one I was so interested in, so I cleared out all the money out of my account, and I said, I'm going to pay $15,000 for this ring that's marked $200. But eventually, my definition of preciousness would be a kind of an old-fashioned one, which is it in a museum? Now, when I started off at the age of 5, precious was Vermeer. I mean, it was amazing to see a Dutch painter. And of course, holding my hand was Mom, who was great. And she would take me, and she was Dutch, so she would take me to the museum. Now, if you go to London today, you see this wonderful catalog and the collection of Cartier. And sure enough...
Oh, at the Victoria and Albert Museum.
It's at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And I had this Taj Mahal emerald for, let's say, 20 years. And I basically lost most of my friends in New York because when they would come to the office, I would be talking about this emerald. But no one thought it was really great. And then finally, all of a sudden, Judy Rudo wrote a book about Cartier, and she found a picture of it. So everything started to come into place. But
are you saying that finding the photo established the provenance, let's say, and therefore the preciousness became more apparent to others?
It became more apparent to others, and it became more apparent to me. And if you're very frustrated, the best thing you can do is get a pencil and a paper and start your own novel, because everything that you want to happen, if you want a character to say, I love you, you're the, then you just write it out on a piece of paper. So what I did was I had the emerald. I couldn't convince anybody. My wife is a therapist in my high school prom date. So, you know, it was getting dicey, but then Judy Rudo saved the day, and then it came out, and then I said, oh, I'm going to write my second novel about this. So the preciousness is so metaphysical, and my novels, the stories in the center, and then their commentaries. So I've gone to so many of these conferences with Lisa, and it's great because everybody like talks about their view of why they love jewelry or art or beauty. And we're all commentaries on ourselves and on what we handle. And then there's another great thing. When one dies, and you got to think about this when you're 84, when one dies, you go somewhere and everybody is reading, like Borges says, heaven is a library. Yeah. So we're going to have these conferences for hundreds of years. And that's what makes all of us precious.
Well, back in the here and now, I'd like to go over to Stephen Benson, Communications Director of CIBJO, the World Jewelry Federation, because Steve has a very extensive background in working in the diamond industry, working for CIBJO all around the world. They're about to celebrate they're celebrating their 100th anniversary at a conference in, when is it? In October in Paris, right?
The CIBJO will turn 119 in 2026. The beginning of the centenary year will be at the CIBJO Congress this year, which will be in October.
Right. And as far as preciousness, Stephen and I were talking earlier about how there's many different spheres and ways that business entities, individuals, collectors, all kinds of players define preciousness and advance the message of preciousness. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you break it down?
Yeah, I'll say at the outset over here that CIBJO doesn't have CIBJO, which turns out definitions for just about everything, doesn't really have a definition of precious. Not only that, is that the differentiation between semi-precious and precious that you spoke about is discouraged. If you read through the CIBJO Blue Books, certainly through the CIBJO Colored Stone Blue Book over here, each stone will be dealt with individually. It won't be defined as either being precious or semi-precious or non-precious.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
For that matter. However, and to some degree, I don't know whether this is sort of CIBJO's point of view or my point of view, but jewelry as we know it, or the way that I would define jewelry personally, would be as an art form using precious materials, as opposed to any other art form. And in that respect, I think the definition of precious has both been a blessing in terms of what jewelry is, or the way that it's perceived by the public, but at the same time, it has been a curse. And why do I say curse? Because the value of the individual value of a piece of jewelry, certainly, and I'm not talking about the heritage type jewelry that was highlighted in the previous discussion. I think that they live and they operate in a different atmosphere. But the bulk of jewelry that is being produced, although it is produced, I mean, the craftsmanship and the design and the human effort that goes into creating those pieces the value of the object itself is still so much based upon the raw material. So when a piece of jewelry is evaluated, it's evaluated first and foremost by the value of the stone, by the value of the precious materials, and then only afterwards do you get the cachet of the design.
Yeah.
Lisa disagrees with me, or you don't agree?
I do, but I also have a question.
Yeah.
Talk about when the piece is evaluated, at what stage, because there are various factors that play into an appraisal that are not just about the preciousness of the stone. So
That's right, like who owned it, maybe, sometimes,
there's one, there's who created, well, there's a bunch of paradoxes.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
With jewelry, what about jewelry that involves both the quote precious and the non-precious? And a sort of off-the-cuff idea would be sort of heavily with metal. And that's very reductive and reflexive as an alternative. But the other thing is that in appraising a piece of jewelry, the appraiser would absolutely talk about the raw material, sure, but at the same time, they would talk, perhaps, I should think, appraisals I've read anyway, about if the maker is known, then who that maker is impacts it, how good an example of the work it is. That would be another factor that would rank craft, which could involve not. I mean, some people were not great craftsmen, and yet they're in the stars for various reasons. But it could involve craft, and then a last thing I'll mention, although not a final thing, would be provenance of the piece. And also, if, for example, if somebody like Benson traditionally did design, then how is the provenance of the piece that is being asserted, documented, and unsigned? So I think that the appraisal of a piece of jewelry is I see it as it's quite a complex endeavor, but there's no doubt that something that privileges, if you will, jewelry, if we're talking about it as things including or made of precious materials, is that there is inherent value, and that may be part of the reason that they endure.
I don't disagree with you, but and I think I gave the example when we had the meeting before the Congress, and I told the story of and this happened just a few years ago. I live in Israel. I'm originally South African, and the son of a cousin of mine emigrated to Israel, and his mother gave him a piece of jewelry that she had received from her own mother that had been designed by, as far as I understood, a well-known South African designer. That was a brooch, predominantly what we believed was ruby with the diamond centerpiece. And the kid brought it through and said he needed the money, and could I help him sell it? And I put him in touch with somebody that I knew in the industry, who a well-known gemologist who also does appraising, and he took the piece in. The guy called me up a few weeks after, and he said, "Listen, we appraised the piece, and I have to tell you that all the ruby that was used in this piece was synthetic. The diamond itself is not bad, but essentially all he's going to be able to get for that piece is whatever the diamond was valued at, plus whatever precious metal existed in the material. The ruby, to all intents and purposes, had no specific value. The provenance of the piece, the design of the piece, because it was being appraised in a country where they weren't familiar with the designer, had no value. So I take your point. I take your point, and within a certain context, within a certain market, within a certain sphere, certainly if it's material that is designed by certain houses, etc., Absolutely. Every single point that you made is that you made is valid. But at the end of the day, here was a piece of jewelry that had existed in the family for years and years, evidently produced by somebody who was well known, and its value essentially came down entirely to the value of the materials of which it was comprised.
Well, first of all, this is an intensely fascinating conversation, and I hope that we will have it for years to come.
You could go on and on, it's true.
I will mention one final point for Kyle. Asked a small question to someone else. One of the things about appraising is also selecting the appraiser and what the appraiser has expertise in, and also there is the criticality of the market with which something is being evaluated. And that's one of the reasons, for example, if I have this great California Impressionist painting, I'm not going to try to sell it in New York. I'm going to go back to California because the market there for that is really hot. Now, we're not talking about painting, we're talking about stuff, great jewelry, and clearly the person who consulted their authoritative grounding was coming out of gemology. Who knows the other factors? So, in a way, it's illustrative. It's also kind of a cautionary tale that we need to be selective about our experts.
Right, but I think it also goes to the root of the intention of what is precious and what is not, because to a large degree, the concept of precious is a function of the stories that we tell about that product. And if there is a story to tell about the product, then we can transform it into something that is more precious.
Can I
Also,
segue with
also,
something?
I wanted to say,
Okay,
though,
you go
that
ahead.
there's also, there's a market for everything. And so, like, you see the costume jewelry that has been owned by certain women, society women, or we saw in the Jacqueline Onassis auction that this sort of, I don't know what the right adjective is, but, it's fashion jewelry. It's not even terribly...
Precious.
Well, it's not terribly precious, but it's not even, for many people in this room, they wouldn't even give it a second look, but it was just, she had it in her collection. And so, but it sold for, it was huge, ridiculous sales figures for some of these very sort of mass-produced pieces that were fashion jewelry. But because somebody famous owned it, who's an icon of the 20th century.
Well, I would have a question there.
Yeah.
Which is, there's no doubt about it that provenance is the unbelievably powerful.
Yep.
We had Jackie Kennedy's big pearls for example. At the same time,
She had Kenneth J. Lane things that were like,
I'm not sure that a high price is an affirmation of precious.
nor am I. But I'm saying somebody thought it was precious enough to pay a lot of money, so it's precious to them. Go ahead, dance.
Right, but I think the
Yeah.
definitions that you gave of precious, I think the Jackie Kennedy jewelry meets every single one of them.
You think the what?
Jackie Kennedy
It could,
jewelry.
yeah. I mean, to me, in this context, the definition, just to have some way to not be talking about everything
Yeah.
in the world, would also be about the materials. And this maybe speaks to what you're saying too, because it's, there it makes a difference that the rubies are lab-grown, right? Or they were synthetic or whatever. And the diamond is somehow was never created by a human. It somehow came from outside the human social world. So that, to me, is a good example of what I was thinking about preciousness. So it sort of depends whether the fake pearls of Jackie Onassis, to me, might not fall within that because it didn't have that triangulation, but that's just me.
Right.
And speaking of the diamond, when you think that the diamond is in a volcano under the earth, and
Yeah.
there's huge pressure, and then it shot up, and okay, when you compare it to a man-made diamond, say, oh, it looks the same on the visually, but the association of the diamond as being like us if you're under a lot of pressure and somehow you survive, and then this artist cuts it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, that to me is super
Right.
precious.
Yeah, and can I just add one sort of, another example with respect to gold? And this came out of a different part of a study that I'm working on now, which was around the relationship between gold and Bitcoin. I have a chapter in my book that's forthcoming about that, and I was interviewing a guy who's a kind of commentator on economy, knows a lot about this, and he was talking about the ways in which Bitcoin, the original white paper for Bitcoin, is explicitly modeled on gold, is trying to create a digital gold. One of the reasons for that is that it's trying to create and I'm not saying that this is necessarily successful, but the attempt is to create a kind of value that is like beyond governments or banks, right? That's something that's in the code for the example of Bitcoin. And he made the example of gold and the ways that there's a kind of, natural scarcity of gold. There's only going to be so much. And the phrase he used was, with gold, the earth is the central banker. And, it's that idea that, there's something that's outside what we can really control or know. There's a real allure to that, I think.
That's so conceptually interesting, too, considering that gold came in meteorites, and bombarded into the earth and went slammed in, and it's from outer space. It's amazing.
Well, and to go back to what Stephen was saying is, I do get a lot of calls from appraisers, and they do break jewelry down to the weight and the stone. I mean, you're an appraiser, Amy. Am I not incorrect that when you value a piece, often it has nothing to do with provenance?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'm a wholesaler, my value is based at X.
That's right.
Retailer, my value is based at X. If my job as an appraiser is to appraise a piece for insurance purposes, you have to go to a retailer to have a value, that's the market. If I'm somebody's estate work, many different markets, but we'll just say fair market value is the secondary market value. Sometimes it's auction, sometimes it's dealers, sometimes it's store dealers. There are many different markets, many different values, depending on what your purposes are.
okay, now if I could just go back to my other bone of contention, following your thread of thought here, is that I've witnessed over the last 30 years, some incredible 40 years, jewelers that were small, one-man, one-woman jewelry shops that have made unbelievably cool pieces, phenomenal designs that are, I always reflect back on our friend Bill Ritchie or Richard Kimball, I could list all day long. Who I know most of their jewelry now has been melted.
Mm-hmm.
Now talk about erasing a chunk of designer history. It did only have the value of the gold and the stones per se, but we didn't have the time to age it in order to give it that precious rarity of art, which I think gets confused. Yeah, cycle of taste.
Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
But also, with respect to, one of the things that's spoken about with respect to appraisals is there are also different kinds of appraisals. So are you appraising for, insurance value, replacement value? What is the purpose of the appraisal? Because that's definitely going to affect the monetary valuation. But one of the questions I would ask is, So, no, but I mean, the point is, it isn't simply what the thing costs.
Right.
And it isn't, precious is a complex thing. Money is an indicator, but not necessarily a specific corollary.
You know, there was the discussion, and it was a very, I think, useful discussion that we had just before this panel with the heritage houses. And I think the point was made, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, he was talking about an Oscar Heyman piece that was then sold under the Cartier label by a factor of 3 or something over here, or eventually became a factor of 3.
Yep.
Now, this is the same piece of jewelry, signed, so it's either signed, sold by the brand or sold under a different name, and two vastly different values were given. Is the one more precious than the other?
Well, that's a great question, and the other question is the price sticker the reflection of precious? Because, for example, if I have say I'm wearing a cross, and I ask the jeweler to make that cross for me, and the jeweler says to me, why do you want that cross? And I say, to remind me of the faith I do not have. And this is actually a true story, but it's not my cross. And I get this incredibly interesting conceptual piece, the rectangle with a cross excised, and the points are marked ruby. One, I have no faith. The thing is precious. The monetary value, probably not so much. See, Benjamin is in the DNA. So, what makes something precious?
If you didn't have faith, how could you possibly start these movements with so few people and get them up to this point? I think you have immense faith.
Oh, me? I said it wasn't my fault.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
someone else's.
Oh, got it.
Simon wants to say something, and you just, yeah.
To some extent, I think the discussion of what is precious is somewhat insane. Because what is precious is an individual thing. It's like the word love.
It's an opinion.
We all know what love is, but love is different. Each one of us has their own feelings about what love is. Each one of us has their own feelings and understanding of what precious is. So I think, you know, trying to
Quantitate it.
define precious is a bit like looking for the Holy Grail.
But that's why we do it. Of course, it's impossible. That's why we do it.
Well, I don't know, let's go back to Sibja and the centrality that's placed, if you will, on attributes as opposed to categories. So I may have a super phenomenal rhodochrosite, and I may have an absolute crappy dyed ruby. Should I privilege the ruby? Hey, what about that?
You know my answer.
You know, there's a color SI4 diamond precious.
Amy has it.
Yeah.
Benjamin can speak to the magic of the time.
And
I
somebody's
thi- I
got
think
their hand
Amy
up at
wants
the
to
back
talk.
of it. Yeah.
If I'm reading the definition of this channel correctly, it's personality and precious. My reason for my definition is that it's an emotion.
Mhm.
And precious has a
You just said.
emotional context to it. I could put value on an emotion, but kind of it's love. Well, more precious is different than this precious. Except that in my
Wow.
precious is an emotional
Right.
response. It's not a value, it's not a quantitative. We can all agree that's a beautiful stone.
Yeah, many jewelry lovers say the same thing, because as a journalist, I write for Forbes, I write for Rappaport, I interview people all the time about their jewelry collections. Many people say, it's not even something that's a rational thing, I don't have the vocabulary for it, it's an emotional thing. Which reminds me, Hugo, I had some photos that I submitted. Is it possible that we could put them up as we close? Because some of them contain materials that hitherto were considered, I suppose, very common or Okay, so that's a rather interesting piece. There was a coyote vertebrae with crystals and African 19th century beads. That's Pawa shell from New Zealand. But these are all high-ticket items that people have paid. Solange Azaguri partridge, enameled hot lips ring. In Celtic bronze, that's the back of the double spiral fibula from 900 AD that's in the collection of the Swiss Gemological Institute. Laurent Cartier, who couldn't be with us today, gave me that slide. And this is just ebony from some furniture leg that the artist had her, and made it into a bracelet, yeah. And then this is Corlet, Boucheron, made a high jewelry collection based on asbestos waste material and brought that out. So precious or not precious, what do we think? Are any of these, I mean, that's amylite, fossil material. What do we think? I mean, is it precious, non-precious? I think it's sort of like, isn't there a famous quote, Bruce Nauman says it's art if you say it's art, or was that Duchamp? I can't remember. I mean, it's precious if you say it's precious, right? Well, but I mean, a lot of people believe that. Who, you know, and that's a consensus of a lot of people.
I think there's a question at the back.
Yeah, in the back, yes.
I guess I would go back to Mr. Ferry's comment, and maybe it's brought up by the pieces. I mean, during the diamond panel yesterday, during one of the like what sailing, who was sailing, that discussion, Ferry also made a comment that you have to distinguish between the product and the actors involved in it. It seems to me that we're all wrestling with the question of, like, if you're discussing the product, then there's likely an objective, like a relatively objective way to evaluate preciousness based on the thing itself. But then the subjective to who are the people involved and where they come from, and then we don't know that how much that's valued. So it looks to me that somewhere in that comment, like there's the thing, there's the stone, there's the gold, there's the way it's crafted together, and then there's the humans that have been involved in it and touched by it, whether it
Yeah.
came out of the ground, how it's bomb. There's like two ingredients.
I think that's great. And I would just add the knowledge of the place where it came from can add value, and also the lack of knowledge can add value. There are certain kinds of substances where erasing the origins creates a certain kind of mystique, capacity to commercialize in particular ways, and I think that's actually a political problem. The fact of moments when origins are either displayed in a certain kind of way that may or may not be consistent with how people experience their lives, or that are not displayed, occluded. And I think that's,
Yeah, I
and
think
that speaks
Stephen
to
could
the
add
kind of thing that
something.
you're saying.
Stephen should add something
Well,
here.
I wanted to add something else, because I think there's another element over here. At the end of the day, we're talking about the jewelry business, and there's a common narrative. And the common narrative is influenced by the not only the stories that we tell ourselves, but the stories that we are told by the people marketing the goods to us. So in the 1930s, diamonds were put on a pedestal by De Beers' famous "A Diamond Is Forever" campaign, and the industry was changed, and the industry was changed forever. Does that inherently make the diamond more precious than other stones?
No.
Inherently, no.
No,
But from a marketing point of view, from
Right.
the point of view of the human and the historical experience, yes, it does, because that's what people believe.
Right, because preciousness isn't only an inherent
Right.
process.
Now there's a threat to that image, because there are synthetic stones that approximate, at least from a visual point of view, not only from a visual point, but also from a chemical perspective,
Right.
the diamond exactly in the same way. But if I took a poll of people over here, if I said, is a natural diamond, maybe we'll take a poll, just raise your hand, If I've got a 2-carat natural diamond, is that a precious object?
Yes.
Yes. If I've got exactly the same 2-carat diamond and you know it to be synthetic, is it precious? No. So,
I would say no.
right.
But take
So
it then
there's my
into
point.
pearls. What about a pearl? If a pearl is natural, is that precious? If a pearl is seeded, is that not considered precious?
Well, I had that discussion earlier today with Olga. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we have to agree that we're going to reconvene this panel next year. Because it's time to wrap up. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, David. Thank you, Isabel, Hugo, and all of the tech people.
And thank you, Lisa.
And thank you, Lisa.